Your sister's wedding comes first." Those were the last words my mother said before hanging up the phone the day. I told her I had stage 3 cancer. I was 23, sitting alone in a hospital corridor that smelled of disinfectant and fear. My hands trembled around the biopsy report. Nurses moved past me. Machines beeped somewhere behind the closed treatment room doors. The world felt impossibly loud. Yet all I could hear was the silence after my mother ended the call. I stared at my phone, expecting it to ring again. It never did. Not from my mother, not from my father. While my family discussed flower arrangements, guest lists, and wedding venues, I sat through consultations about chemotherapy, survival rates, and side effects. Every appointment reminded me that I might not live long enough to see another birthday. The cancer terrified me, but realizing I was completely alone terrified me even more. I was the older child, but somehow I had always felt invisible. My parents loved telling people how talented my younger sister was. Every family gathering became another celebration of her achievements, her plans, her future. I wasn't hated. I was simply forgotten. There's a difference, and somehow it hurts more. Growing up, I learned not to expect much. If I won an award, it was briefly acknowledged before attention returned to someone else. If I needed help, there was always a reason they couldn't give it. I became the reliable one, the child who never caused problems, never demanded attention, and quietly handled things alone. By 23, I had built a life around that reality. I worked long hours, paid my own bills, and rarely asked anyone for support. Part of me believed that if I stayed strong enough, useful enough, eventually my family would see me differently. They never did. When my cancer diagnosis arrived, it didn't create a new family dynamic. It exposed the one that had always existed. The hardest part wasn't the disease itself. It was realizing that the people I would have crossed oceans for wouldn't even cross town for me. Still, I kept hoping. Hope has a strange way of surviving long after evidence tells it not to. The weeks after my diagnosis revealed truths I had spent years trying not to see. My first chemotherapy session lasted hours. I sat beneath fluorescent lights, watching other patients arrive with spouses, siblings, and parents carrying blankets and coffee cups. My chair remained surrounded by empty space. I texted my mother a photo from the treatment room. Hours later, she replied with a single sentence. "How are wedding invitations looking?" For a moment, I thought she had sent it to the wrong person. Then I realized she was asking me to help proofread my sister's invitations, while poison dripped into my veins. The pattern continued. My father rarely called unless he needed a favor. When he did, there was always an awkward pause whenever I mentioned treatment, as if my illness were an inconvenience interrupting a more important conversation. During one family video call, my sister spent 20 minutes discussing table decorations. When I quietly mentioned losing my hair, the conversation stalled for a second before someone changed the subject. No one was cruel enough to say they didn't care. Instead, they mastered something subtler. They acted as though my suffering belonged in the background. I watched their eyes drift away whenever the topic turned to hospitals or scans. I listened to their voices brighten whenever attention returned to wedding plans. And with each polite dismissal, something inside me grew quieter. Not weaker, just quieter. The turning point didn't come during chemotherapy. It came 5 years later. I was sitting in my doctor's office when he smiled, closed my file, and said the words I had dreamed about hearing for years. "You're cancer-free." The room seemed strangely still. Sunlight spilled through the window. For a moment, I couldn't speak. I had survived, not because anyone carried me through it, not because my family stood beside me. I survived because I showed up to every appointment alone, because I endured every treatment, every setback, every terrifying scan result without the support I had once begged for. That evening, I went home and looked through old messages on my phone. There were dozens of conversations about wedding plans, family events, and favors they needed from me, almost none asking how I was doing. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger had burned out years ago. What remained was clarity. For years, I had kept a place in my life reserved for people who never truly showed up for me. I kept hoping they would become the family I needed if I just waited long enough. Looking at those messages, I finally accepted the truth. They had already shown me who they were. The mistake wasn't theirs anymore. The mistake was expecting something different. And that was the day I stopped waiting. After that realization, I didn't make a dramatic announcement. I didn't send angry messages, confront anyone, or demand apologies. I simply adjusted my life to match reality. The first step was emotional. I stopped reaching out first. No holiday calls, no check-in texts, no reminders about birthdays or anniversaries. I wanted to see what happened when I stopped carrying the entire relationship by myself. The silence was revealing. Weeks became months. Months became years. Meanwhile, My own life continued moving forward. The discipline that had carried me through cancer became an advantage in everything else. I earned promotions at work, built financial stability, and developed a close circle of friends who had proven they would show up when life became difficult. I updated my emergency contacts. None of them were family. I reviewed my insurance paperwork, medical directives, and legal documents. Every form reflected the people who had actually supported me during my hardest years. No threats, no punishments, just facts. Whenever my parents called asking for help with errands, money, or family obligations, I responded politely, but stopped rearranging my life to solve their problems. For the first time, my time had value. My energy had value. My loyalty had value. The revenge wasn't making them suffer. It was quietly removing access to someone they had spent years taking for granted. The payoff arrived on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. I was finishing work when my phone lit up with my mother's name. We hadn't spoken in months. The moment I answered, I heard her crying. Her health had declined suddenly. She needed help getting to appointments, managing paperwork, and handling daily responsibilities. My sister, now married and living several hours away, couldn't be there regularly. As she spoke, I stared out the office window at the fading sunlight reflecting off nearby buildings. 5 years earlier, I had sat alone in another chair, facing another frightening medical reality. The memory returned with perfect clarity. The hospital corridor, the unanswered calls, the feeling of being told that someone else's life mattered more than mine. My mother finally stopped talking. A long silence settled between us. For the first time, she seemed to be waiting for me, waiting for the same support I had once needed. I felt no anger, no satisfaction from her pain, only certainty, so I gave her the same consideration she had given me years ago. Just 2 words. Can't right now. The line went silent. No yelling followed, no dramatic confrontation, only the weight of recognition. Because some consequences don't arrive through revenge. They arrive when people finally meet the reality they spent years creating. The reactions came slowly. A few days after that phone call, my father contacted me. His voice carried a mixture of frustration and disbelief, as though he couldn't understand why. I wasn't immediately stepping in to help. For years, my family had viewed my reliability as something permanent. No matter how little support I received, I was always expected to appear when needed. Now that expectation was colliding with reality. My sister called next. She spoke carefully at first, then defensively. She reminded me that family should be there for one another. I listened quietly, noticing that neither she nor my father mentioned the years I spent fighting cancer alone. That silence said everything. Word gradually spread through relatives. Some thought I was being cold. Others privately admitted they understood. A few even confessed they had always wondered why my family seemed absent during my illness. For the first time, the story wasn't being told from my parents' perspective. It was being seen clearly. The greatest consequence wasn't damage to their reputation. It was the loss of unquestioned access to someone they assumed would always sacrifice himself, and that's why this matters. Many people spend years chasing approval from those who only value their presence when it's convenient. The moment you recognize your own worth, the entire relationship changes. Sometimes the strongest boundary sounds almost identical to the excuse that once broke your heart. People often assume revenge ends with a dramatic victory. Mine didn't. After that phone call, life simply continued. I went back to work. I met friends for dinner. I attended my annual medical checkups and listened, with gratitude each time. A doctor confirmed that the cancer was still gone. The future I once feared losing had quietly become my everyday reality. Over time, I stopped replaying old conversations in my head. I stopped wondering whether my parents finally understood. Some questions no longer needed answers. What mattered was that I understood. Cancer taught me something my family never could. Survival isn't just about staying alive. It's about learning where to invest your time, your energy, and your love. Today, my circle is smaller but stronger. The people in my life are people who show up, not when it's convenient, not when they need something, when it matters. As for my parents, the door was never slammed shut. But it no longer stands wide open either. Relationships like trust require effort from both sides. The greatest gift I gave myself wasn't revenge. It was permission to stop earning love that should have been given freely. 5 years ago, I fought to save my life. In the years that followed, I finally learned how to protect it.